Hey, I'm not sure if you get the memo, but AAA Gaming is dying. That's right, if you happen to miss the thousands of other videos on this topic, it would appear that AAA games are in big trouble. Fret not if you're a fan though, enough of these companies are still doing fine, releasing blockbuster titles and making billions of dollars, but it does seem in many ways this portion of the industry has been collapsing under its own weight as of late. Think about how often we've seen these new big AAA games launching and failing by most metrics. I mean, recently we had a few high-profile examples. Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, the live service game from Rocksteady, launched in February, peaked at 13,000 concurrent players, and dropped down to an abysmally low 400 1 month later. The game averaged review scores of around 60% from critics, and according to its own publisher, sales fell far below expectations, resulting in a poor financial quarter. The net result of them developing this game, it cost Warner Bros. Nearly $200 million in losses. Skull and Bones, the standalone spin-off of the much-beloved ship combat from Assassin's Creed Black Flag, spent over 11 years in development, reportedly cost Ubisoft over $200 million to make, and immediately post-release found itself in shambles and washed ashore. Review scores averaged around 61, the game accrued less than 1 million total players across all platforms, and apparently it is not expected to recoup its development costs. Not a great showing for the world's first quadruple A game. Both of these examples, I think, highlight some of the bigger issues for AAA games in general. Massive budgets, long development times, and no room for failure. Many of these games take on average 5 to 7 years to make, with development time for some of these titles exceeding a decade. And this time translates to loads of money. In fact, I would say one of the biggest sources of problems for AAA gaming, period, stems from the fact that these games cost way too much to make. In the late 90s and early 2000s, the high end of development costs for games included titles like Final Fantasy VII and Halo 2, which both cost $40 million, or World of Warcraft, which cost $65 million. But again, these numbers were at the high end of cost in the time frame between, say, 95 and 2005. Most other games that we'd consider AAA of this time period fell well below the mark. The original BioShock was made for just $25 million. Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time cost $12 million. Metal Gear Solid cost $10 million. Call of Duty Finest Hour $8.5 million. The original Mass Effect was reportedly made for under $3 million, and EverQuest was also made for only $3 million. Can you believe that? But over the past 2 decades, things have become much more expensive across the board, but this applies to game development as well. On average, it seems that most AAA games nowadays will cost in the ballpark of $50 million, with many of the biggest games swinging well above that number. Breaking the $100 million mark included Battlefield 4, GTA 4, Destiny, and Final Fantasy XIV. Games that cost over $200 million to make were Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, Horizon Forbidden West, Last of Us 2, New World, Star Wars The Old Republic, and Elder Scrolls Online. Spider-Man 2 cost over $300 million, Cyberpunk 2077 $400 million, Star Citizen has broke and counting the $600 million mark, and Genshin Impact ran in at $700 million in development cost, although I do believe this figure includes post-launch support. Nevertheless, they're getting close to $1 billion in development cost for that game, although I think it's probably made over $1 billion at this point. But regardless, between the fact that these games now take on average at least half a decade to make, and they cost so many millions of dollars, the result is little to no room for failure. And when a AAA game does flop, well, we've seen the outcome in recent months, with a new round of layoffs announced every other week and seemingly nearly as many studio closures. Surprise, most companies can't afford to take 5 years making a game that ends up not only not making money, but losing them $200 million. That is the opposite of what they were hoping for. And I think because of that, for the most part, AAA games are just way too expensive for them to take any risks. I mean, this is pretty obvious. Games that don't take risks get pretty boring after the 1000th iteration that you've played. If 95% of the structure, design, and gameplay of, let's say, your brand new MMO plays exactly like every other MMO that I've already played over these past 30 years, guess what? It's gonna get really boring really fast. And in an industry categorized as entertainment, if I'm bored, I'm out of here. I guess unless I'm addicted, in which case I'll stick around for a little while longer. longer. Damn you, game designers developing with psychological manipulation. Yeah, these games cost too much money. They can't afford to take any risks, and the result is the bland mush of focus-tested, streamlined, psychologically optimized chum that we are so accustomed to. And don't get me wrong here. Hey, I enjoy eating my dopamine manipulating chum from time to time as well. It can be satisfying to turn your brain off and smash through hordes of monsters. After all, lizard brain go burr. I'm not above it. I'm not better. I'm no better than anyone else. In fact, looking for groups for Uber Duriel farming, by the way. Hit me up if you're doing it. I think the worst part, though, isn't even how these games are designed and focus tested into that mush, that gameplay loop, but rather because of the vast amounts of money and time it takes to make these, we the consumers end up on the brunt end of recouping those costs. Enter every microtransaction you've ever known. And I know you're sick of hearing the list, but here's the rundown. We, of course, have the box price for most of these games, but then there are the free-to-play variants, which inevitably will include some variation of subscription. Nowadays, these are pretty much done in the form of battle passes. And then you've got the cash shops with the microtransactions. The cosmetics, that's the easy one. Everyone's happy to hand wave those at this point. Gone are the days of earning your cosmetics through playing the game. You pay for them now. And then the convenience features, right? Where we spend extra money to bypass the inconveniences that were put into the game by the developers, so we would want to spend that money. And then the most egregious variation is the paying for power, where you spend money to speed up your progression. This is also known as pay to skip. Skip stands for skipping playing the game. That's what it's for. And then to go along with these cash shops, with these sold convenience features and these powers that you're paying for, you will have these games designed aimed to pushing you towards the shop, such as having worse quality of life so that you want to buy the convenience features to bypass it, or having inflated grinds to push you towards purchasing that power and those skips. And now, man, we are AAA gaming. As I said in another recent video of mine, any game that sells convenience and or power of some sort, they are literally making the game worse on purpose so that you are given motivation to buy what they are selling. Just so happens, unfortunately enough, one of my favorite genres of games, the MMOs, the live service games, they are especially guilty of this. They're the worst offenders. And I think there's a nice separation that can be made between the AAA games industry for like the single player linear playthrough experience, and then the AAA game industry when it comes to those live services and those MMOs. A lot of what I'm talking about leans more towards that, although there can be an argument for a lot of these AAA games, single player titles as well. It's not really the portion of the AAA industry that I'm talking about. So anyways, yes, AAA games, they take forever to develop. They cost hundreds of millions of dollars. They're too expensive to take risks, which result in a lot of them feeling the same. And on top of that, some, especially those MMOs and live service titles that I love so dearly, it hurts me so much, they're all pretty much made worse in order to sell us microtransactions on the back end. So I think it's no surprise then, in recent years, a lot of the AAA portion of the industry is being put to shame by indie and mid-tier studios. Devs who started out making their game out of a Reddit thread, just like coming up with an idea on a Reddit post and saying, hey, let's make a studio and let's make a game. That's what resulted in Last Epoch. Or developers who admit they don't even really know how to make games and end up churning out Pal World, one of the biggest games of all time on Steam. It is absolutely crazy. We've got studios in many cases made up of 50 or less employees just demolishing the sales numbers and player counts of development conglomerates with tens of thousands of people working on titles for them. In the past 12 months, just looking at my own gaming habits, I can happily say some of my favorite games have been Enshrouded, Last Epoch, Manor Lords, No Rest for the Wicked, V Rising, Baldur's Gate 3, and Witchfire. Not to say that I haven't enjoyed any AAA games. Top of my head would be Dragon's Dogma 2. I had a great time with. I played a lot of WoW Classic, specifically Season of Discovery, and Diablo 4 I revisited recently and had a solid 2 weeks of entertainment, although I'm probably done at this point. But yes, a majority of my playtime with games over this past year has been with games made by indie devs or those mid-tier AA studios. And I think a large part of the reason for this is because these games are made by smaller, more cohesive teams. When you've got development studios like, say, Ubisoft, for example, who in a lot of cases will have many thousands of people working on like single Assassin's Creed games, a lot gets lost in the sauce there. Too many cooks in the kitchen, as they say, and you don't have that kind of streamlined focus and vision that you tend to get with these games made by smaller studios. Also, because with these indie studios and these mid-tier studios, you don't have budgets that are as blown out, which makes them a lot more likely to be willing to take risks and try new things. In fact, I would even argue that indie and mid-tier studios, they have to take risks, because in order to stand out as a small studio amongst the sea of many thousands and thousands of indie devs, you have to make something that feels novel and unique, and to do that, you have to try new things, you have to take risks, what a lot of AAA studios just aren't willing to do. Get that argument that, hey, a lot of Assassin's Creed games all feel the same, a lot of the Far Cry titles feel very similar. Ubisoft isn't the only one guilty of this, but Call of Duty, I guess that's another great example. You get these big AAA studios that seem to churn out, again, those risk-averse products, whereas the indie studios have to take risks in order for anyone to even pay attention to them. And as a result, we get more novel and interesting concepts in some circumstances. And I think the cherry on top is the fact that for the most part, indie games aren't full of all of that cost recouping BS, those microtransactions, those cash shops full of convenience and power for sale, you know what I mean? They are just games that are sold to you many times at a base cost, and that is it. You just play it for fun. That's the end of the transaction. And again, this is mostly applicable to the MMO and specifically the live service portion of the AAA industry, but even some of it bleeds into the single player games. You're seeing single player games with cash shops and season passes as well. It hasn't escaped that portion either. And I do want to make it clear here, this isn't a I hate AAA games video, because I don't, and they have their place in the industry. I play a lot of them, and for the most part, this is what appeals to the wider market. Although I will say it has been great to see games from smaller studios reach the masses with titles like Baldur's Gate 3 from Larian, with Palworld, and even the Helldivers franchise. Really, really cool to see these smaller studios, these indie devs, strike out and get such mass appeal and get just such high player numbers and sales. Really love to see it. And yes, I myself do enjoy AAA titles. I play plenty of them, and I'm sure I will in the future as well. But there are definitely aspects of the AAA games that I'm just tired of, right? I'm just sick and tired of, and it's been so great. I've been so happy to have these indies and these mid-tier studios stepping up and putting up just like absolute bangers, just fantastic, entertaining, plain fun games, and yeah, better yet, no cash shop. That's a nice cherry on top. Long and the short is, I've been having a blast with a lot of these indie and mid-tier studio developed projects, and I hope to see a lot more in the future. They've been great stuff, and AAA games, I don't know what the future is going to be for the industry. Again, I'm sure they will be just fine. We're probably going to see more consolidation in the future, and I know a lot of the woes when it comes to things like layoffs and studio closures, they're not specific to the games industry, but nevertheless, that doesn't mean that there are no problems with AAA gaming, or that some of these issues aren't tied to how things go. A lot of what I covered here with AAA game development, the long times, the high costs, the resulting lack of willing to take risks, and the back end of the monetization tied into the development, parts of the game stripped so they can sell it to us, or made more inconvenient so they can sell us the answer to that. All of those things are true, and they exist sort of outside of the conversation of, you know, people who are investing aren't willing to spend as much money and take as many risks. That is also true. But yeah, I don't know. I've been loving me some good old indie games nowadays. Hopefully you've been enjoying some as well. That does it for today's video though. Thank you as always for watching. Hope you enjoyed. I'll see you guys next time.